The dust hit her first, a hot, gritty wind that tasted of failure. Catherine Morgan stumbled down the main street of Silver Creek, and the world began to shrink. The Arizona sun was a hammer, beating on her thin bonnet. Her vision tunneled, the edges going dark and fuzzy as the ground tilted like the deck of a ship in a storm. 3 days since she'd last eaten a real meal. She was 500 miles from everything she'd ever known. Boston was a ghost. In her pocket, she had 2 pennies. Around her neck, a locket with a picture of her dead mother. That was it. That was all she had left. The year was 1876. She'd come chasing a promise, a teaching position, solid as gold, or so she'd thought. But the West had a way of turning gold to dust. The promise had vanished, evaporated right in front of her. The telegram was brutal, position filled, regrets, no other opportunities. She saw a woman passing, her face a blur of judgment. "Excuse me," Catherine whispered, the words catching in her throat like sand. "Is there a place?" The words died. The world spun, a violent, sickening lurch. Her knees gave out. For a split second she was weightless. Then only darkness. But just before it all went black, she saw them. A pair of blue eyes, sharp and concerned, looking down at her from under the brim of a worn cowboy hat. Zachary Hayes had his horse tied to the post when he saw her. A slip of a thing in a faded blue dress, swaying in the street like a sapling in a hurricane. Something about her snagged his attention. The stubborn set of her shoulders, maybe. She was in trouble, that was plain, but she wasn't giving up. Then she dropped. A heap of skirts and dust. He was moving before he even thought about it. "Give her air." Zach's voice cut through the gathering crowd. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling over her still form. Her face was ghost white under the trail dust, her cheekbones too sharp, her lips cracked and dry. He slid his arms under her. She weighed nothing, a bundle of sticks and cloth. That worried him more than the fainting. "Someone get Doc Miller," he called out. He'd seen starvation during the war. He knew its hollowed-out look. "Ain't no need for a doctor," a sharp voice said. Mrs. Holloway, from the general store. "That girl's just hungry. Been watching her for an hour, staring at the bread in my window like it was a pile of diamonds." Zach's jaw went tight. He knew that look. He'd lived that look. "Then I'll get her some food. Tom," he said to the store owner, "a basket, bread, cheese, whatever you've got. I'm taking her to the hotel." Mrs. Peterson at the Silver Creek Hotel wasn't happy about it. An unconscious woman of unknown character. But Zach's $3 silver made her see things differently. He settled Catherine on the bed, and soon Tom Holloway arrived with a basket. Bread, dried fruit, a jar of preserves. "Put it on my account," Zach said, "and have your wife send over some broth." When Catherine's eyes fluttered open, the first thing she saw was a ceiling made of rough, unfinished wood. Confusion hit her like a wave. Where was she? How? The street. The dizziness. Then nothing. "You're awake." The deep voice made her jump. She turned her head. A man sat in a chair by the bed, tall, broad-shouldered, skin tanned by the sun. It was him, the man with the blue eyes. He was watching her, his expression a mix of worry and something else. Assessment, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. "Where am I?" she croaked. "Silver Creek Hotel. You fainted." He offered her a glass of water. "Drink slow." She tried to sit up, shame burning her cheeks. "I am so sorry for the trouble." "No trouble. You were hungry, not drunk." He said it like a fact, like he was stating the color of the sky. No judgment, just truth. "There's food, when you're ready." Her stomach twisted at the word. Food. Pride fought a losing battle with the gnawing ache inside her. "I cannot accept charity, sir." "It's not charity, it's bread," he cut in, his tone stubborn. "And the name's Zachary Hayes. Folks call me Zach." She hesitated, her dignity crumbling. Catherine Morgan. He nodded, grabbing the basket and setting it on the bed beside her. Eat first. Worry later. The first bite of bread was so good it almost made her cry. She forced herself to go slow, to chew, even though her body screamed at her to tear into it like an animal. Zach watched her for a second, then turned to look out the window, giving her a bit of privacy. "You're not from around here," he said to the glass. "Boston," she managed to say between bites. "My parents. They passed. The house was sold to pay debts. I came here for a teaching position." "A teacher," he said, turning back around. She looked up, surprised. "Yes. How did you know?" A small smile played on his lips. "You talk like you've read a lot of books." He paused, then his smile faded. "But there's something you should know about that teaching job, Miss Morgan." Catherine stopped chewing, a piece of bread halfway to her mouth. The look in his eyes had changed. The kindness was still there, but now it was edged with something hard, something dangerous. "What about it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at the door, then back at her, lowering his voice. "It wasn't just filled. It was sold." Catherine stared at him, confused. "Sold? What do you mean? A position can't be sold." "Anything can be sold in Silver Creek, Miss Morgan," he said, his voice low and grim. "The man who runs this town, Mr. Richardson, he owns the new silver mine. And when you own the mine, you own everything else. The school board included. He wanted the job for his niece, so he bought it." The bread in her mouth suddenly tasted like ash. All this way. All for nothing because a rich man wanted a favor for his family. It wasn't just bad luck, it was theft. "How do you know this?" she asked. Zach's eyes narrowed slightly. "I make it my business to know what happens in this town, especially when it involves Mr. Richardson." There was a story there, a history she couldn't begin to guess. She looked down at the food, her appetite gone. Her situation had just gone from unfortunate to impossible. She was in a town run by a corrupt man, a man who had already wronged her, and she owed her life to this stranger, this cowboy who seemed to know all the town's dirty secrets. "I must find work," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a sudden surge of anger. "I cannot stay here." "You've been awake for 10 minutes," Zach said dryly, "and the hotel is paid for till tomorrow." He stood up, towering over the small room. "Listen to me, Miss Morgan. Silver Creek is a hard place, but that doesn't mean you can't find your footing. You just need to be smart about it." He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. "I have a ranch, the Double H, 15 miles north of here. I could use a teacher for my ranch hand's children." The offer hung in the air between them. It was a lifeline. But it was a lifeline from a man she didn't know, a man who seemed to have a feud with the most powerful person in town. Accepting his help could mean walking into a war she didn't understand. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "You don't know me." He put his hat on, pulling the brim low. His blue eyes glinted from the shadows. "Let's just say Mr. Richardson and I have some unfinished business," he said, "and I have a feeling you might be just the person to help me finish it." He left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Catherine alone with a full stomach and a mind racing with 100 new fears. She had come west looking for a job, but it seemed she had just been recruited for a fight. The next morning, Catherine woke to a sliver of sunlight cutting through the dusty window. For a heartbeat, she forgot where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The collapse, the cowboy, the shocking revelation about her job. She sat up and saw a small package on the bedside table, a fresh loaf of bread, an apple, and a note. The handwriting was strong, not elegant. "Miss Morgan," it said, "Mrs. Peterson at the front desk knows everyone. Ask her about work, but be careful who you trust. If you find nothing, my offer for the double H still stands. The children need a teacher. ZPS. Stay away from the Richardson family. The warning was clear, chilling. He had helped her, fed her, offered her a job, but he was also pulling her into his conflict. The choice was a razor's edge: starve with her pride or align herself with a man who was clearly dangerous. She washed her face, straightened her worn dress, and went downstairs. Mrs. Peterson, the hotel owner, looked her up and down. Her eyes were like two small, dark stones. "Mr. Hayes said I should ask you about work," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman's expression didn't change. "Did he now?" It wasn't a question. "Zach Hayes has a long shadow in this town. Some say he's a hero. Others say he's a devil." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's right about one thing. You can't trust anyone here, especially the ones who seem the most respectable." This was a warning, too, but who was it about, Zach or someone else? "What skills you got?" Mrs. Peterson asked, her tone shifting back to business. "Besides talking like a Boston book." "I can sew, I can manage accounts, Can you handle children?" Mrs. Peterson cut her off. "I'm a teacher," Catherine said. The older woman gave a short, sharp nod. It was the first hint of approval Catherine had seen. "The Richardson family," she said, and Catherine's blood ran cold. "They need a housekeeper, a tutor for their 3 kids. Their last one ran off and got married." It was a trap. It had to be. Zach's note had been explicit: stay away from the Richardson family. But Mrs. Peterson was still talking. "They pay well. Room and board included. In that big house on the hill. You'd be safe there. Comfortable." She looked Catherine right in the eye. "Sometimes the safest place to hide is right inside the lion's den." Was this another warning, or a piece of advice? Catherine's mind reeled. Zach had warned her against them. But here was a job, a roof over her head, a way to survive, and maybe, just maybe, Mrs. Peterson was right. If she wanted to understand the man who had stolen her future, perhaps the best way was to walk right through his front door, to see the enemy up close. "I'll take it," Catherine said, her heart pounding. By noon, she was employed. The Richardson house was a palace of polished wood and imported lace, a fortress of wealth at the edge of a dusty, desperate town. Margaret Richardson was a fragile woman with a perpetual headache who seemed relieved to hand over her wild, energetic children. Catherine settled her meager belongings in a small, clean room at the back of the house. She felt like a spy. Every polished banister, every expensive rug seemed to mock her stolen opportunity. 2 weeks passed. She didn't see Zach. She taught the children their letters, managed the household, and listened. She listened to the servants' gossip, to Mr. Richardson's booming pronouncements when he was home, to Mrs. Richardson's quiet, nervous complaints. She learned that Mr. Richardson was obsessed with his silver mine, that he was ruthless in business, and that he had enemies. One name kept coming up in hushed whispers: Zachary Hayes. He was the rancher who wouldn't sell his land for the mine's expansion, the man who had challenged Richardson's claim to the water rights, the only man in Silver Creek who wasn't afraid of its king. Then, on a Saturday morning, she saw him. She was in the general store with the children. The bell over the door jangled, and he walked in, covered in trail dust. Their eyes met across the room. He tipped his hat, a slow, deliberate motion. "Miss Morgan," he said, walking toward her. His eyes weren't kind this time. They were cold, accusing. "I see you found work." "Thanks to your advice," she said, her voice sharp. The children stared up at the tall cowboy. "This is the man who gave you bread?" asked 5-year-old Emma, her voice loud in the quiet store. Catherine felt a flush of heat on her cheeks. "Yes, Emma. Mr. Hayes was very kind." Zach's gaze didn't soften. "I gave you advice, Miss Morgan. My note was very specific." "A woman in my position doesn't always have the luxury of choice," she shot back. Sometimes choosing the easy path is the most dangerous thing you can do, he said, his voice a low rumble. Before she could reply, a man stumbled out of the saloon next door. He was drunk, swaying on his feet. He squinted at Zack, a slow, ugly grin spreading across his face. Well, well, the drunk slurred, pointing a shaky finger. If it ain't Caleb Thorne. Thought you'd be dead by now. Catherine froze. Zack didn't move a muscle, but a stillness came over him, the deadly calm of a coiled snake. You've got the wrong man, Zack said, his voice flat. Oh, I don't think so, the drunk sneered. I'd never forget the face of the man who left his own brother to die at Shiloh. The air in the store crackled with tension. Everyone was staring. The kind stranger, the honorable rancher who helped the woman in need. It was all a lie. His name wasn't Zack Hayes, it was Caleb Thorne, and he was a man who had left his own brother for dead. The drunk's words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Caleb Thorne. The name meant nothing to Catherine, but the accusation behind it was a physical blow. The man who left his own brother to die. The cowboy, her rescuer, didn't flinch. His blue eyes were fixed on the drunk, and they were no longer the color of a summer sky. They were chips of ice. You're drunk, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Go sleep it off before you say something you'll truly regret. I regret nothing, the man spat. I was there. I saw you run, you coward. Left Elias Thorne for the buzzards. Without a word, Zack or Caleb, or whoever he was, turned his back on the man. He looked at Catherine, and for a split second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. A flash of pain so deep it was terrifying. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. He tipped his hat again, a gesture that was now an insult. Miss Morgan, and he walked out of the store, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Come, children, Catherine said, her voice shaking. She grabbed William and Emma by the hand and practically dragged them out of the store, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Everything she thought she knew had just been shattered. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her small bed in the Richardson house, the drunk's accusation echoing in her head. Coward. Left his own brother to die. Was that the unfinished business he had with Mr. Richardson? Was it all connected? Her job with the Richardsons, which had felt like a strategic move, now felt like a prison. She was living in the house of one enemy, while indebted to another, a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. The next day was Sunday. Catherine took the children to church, her eyes scanning the pews. He wasn't there. A part of her was relieved. Another part, a part she didn't want to admit existed, was disappointed. As they left the service, Mr. Richardson was waiting on the steps, a grim look on his face. Catherine, he said, his voice curt. A word, please. He led her to the side of the church, away from the dispersing congregation. I heard there was a scene in the general store yesterday, he said, his eyes hard. Involving you and that rancher, Hayes. It had nothing to do with me, she said quickly. Anything involving Hayes has to do with me, he snapped. He is a thorn in my side, a snake in the grass. I want you to stay away from him. Do you understand me? I don't want his stink anywhere near my family. The threat was unmistakable. But there's more, Richardson continued, leaning in closer. The man who caused the disturbance was found this morning. In the alley behind the saloon. Catherine held her breath. His throat was cut from ear to ear. A wave of nausea washed over her. The drunk, the man who knew Zack's real name, he was dead. The sheriff thinks it was a robbery, Richardson said, watching her face intently. But I know better. Hayes has a temper and a past he wants to keep buried. A man named Caleb Thorne. He's wanted for desertion, among other things. This was it, the escalation. A man was dead, and her savior, the man who gave her bread, was the prime suspect. I'm telling you this for your own good, Richardson finished, his voice like gravel. "You are under my roof now, my protection. Do not forget it." He walked away, leaving Catherine standing in the shadow of the church, her legs trembling. She was trapped. She was living in the home of a man who hated Zach Hayes. And Zach Hayes, or Caleb Thorne, was a wanted man and a suspected murderer. The two most powerful and dangerous men in Silver Creek were on a collision course. And she was standing right in the middle. The dead man's name was Jebediah Smith. The whole town was talking about it. Sheriff Brody, a man whose gut hung over his gun belt, called it a robbery gone wrong. But the whispers said otherwise. The whispers said Zachary Hayes. Catherine felt like she was suffocating. Every time Mr. Richardson looked at her, she felt his suspicion. Every rustle of leaves outside her window at night made her heart leap into her throat. She had to know the truth. A week later, she found her chance. Mrs. Richardson was in bed with one of her headaches, and Mr. Richardson was at the mine. Catherine told the housekeeper she was taking the children for a walk. Instead, she led them to the edge of town and told 7-year-old William to watch his siblings. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the livery stable. She had 2 pennies to her name. It wouldn't be enough to rent a horse. The stable owner, a wiry man named Silas, recognized her. "The Richardson governess," he grunted. "I need to get a message to the Double H Ranch," she said, trying to sound official. "Mr. Richardson's orders." It was a clumsy lie, but Silas just shrugged. "Cost you $1 for a rider?" "I'll pay you when he returns," she bluffed. He eyed her for a moment, then spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Fine. What's the message?" She hadn't thought that far ahead. "Just tell Mr. Hayes that Miss Morgan needs to speak with him, urgently. Tell him to meet me at the old cottonwood tree by the creek at dusk." She spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of high anxiety. What was she doing? Arranging a secret meeting with a potential killer? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plains, she slipped out of the Richardson house. The air was cool, and the sound of crickets was starting to rise. The old cottonwood was a massive, gnarled giant that stood alone by the water. She waited, her arms wrapped around herself, listening to the rush of the creek. He appeared out of the twilight like a ghost, moving silently on foot. He wasn't wearing his hat. In the dim light, his face looked harder, carved from stone. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice low. "You shouldn't be here." "A man is dead," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "The man who called you Caleb Thorne." He didn't react. His face was a mask. "Did you kill him?" she asked, the question hanging between them, terrible and stark. He was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the fading light. "What do you think?" he finally asked. "I think you're not the man you pretend to be," she said. "I think you're in trouble, and you've dragged me into it." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "I saved your life." "And for that, I am grateful," she shot back. "But that doesn't give you the right to lie to me. Who is Caleb Thorne? Who was Elias Thorne?" He looked away toward the dark, rolling hills. When he spoke, his voice was rough with a pain he couldn't hide. "Elias was my younger brother," he said. "We fought together, at Shiloh. It was a slaughter, a nightmare of smoke and blood. We were retreating, our line was broken. Elias went down, his leg. It was shattered." He paused, the memory playing out in his eyes. "I tried to carry him, but they were coming. The Union cavalry. I was just a boy. I was terrified. I ran. I left him there." His voice broke on the last words. The confession was raw, brutal. It was the truth. She could feel it. He was a coward, perhaps, but a murderer? "Jebediah Smith was in our company," he continued, his voice flat again. "He saw it happen. He's held it over my head ever since. Blackmail, a few dollars here and there to keep his mouth shut. So You killed him to silence him? Catherine asked. He finally looked at her, his blue eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. No, I am a lot of things, Miss Morgan. I'm a deserter and a coward who left his own blood to die. But I am not a murderer. Then who did it? Think about it, he said, taking a step closer. Who benefits the most from Jebediah Smith being dead? Who benefits from the whole town thinking I'm a killer? The answer was immediate, obvious. Mr. Richardson. It was a setup. A perfectly orchestrated move to turn the town against him, to force him out. Jebediah wasn't just a drunk, he was a pawn. And he'd been sacrificed. Richardson wants my land, Zach, she would call him Zach, said. There's a vein of silver that runs right under my ranch. He's been trying to buy me out for years. Now he's trying to scare me out. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. Richardson hadn't just stolen her job, he was trying to frame a man for murder to get his land. What are you going to do? She whispered. I'm going to fight back, he said, his voice like cold steel. But I can't do it alone. I need someone on the inside. Someone in that house. He was looking at her. He wasn't asking for a teacher anymore. He was asking for a spy. He trusts you, Zach said. He told you I was a suspect, didn't he? He was testing you, trying to poison you against me. But you came here instead. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. This was insane. She was a teacher from Boston, not a conspirator. But what choice did she have? Richardson was a monster, destroying lives for profit. And Zach was a broken man, haunted by his past. But he wasn't a killer. She was sure of it. What do you need me to find? She asked. A flicker of relief crossed his face, so quick she almost missed it. Proof, he said. Proof that Richardson is manipulating the mining claims. Proof that he hired someone to kill Jebediah. He'll have letters, ledgers, probably in his study. It's a long shot, but it's the only one we've got. He reached out and, for the first time, touched her. His fingers gently brushed her arm. The contact sent a jolt through her. It's dangerous, he said softly. If he finds out. I know, she said, pulling her arm away. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because he took my future. He owes me. She turned and walked back toward the lights of the town, not looking back. She had made her choice. She was no longer just the governess. She was the enemy within. Returning to the Richardson house was like entering a different world. The polished floors and quiet hallways now seemed sinister. The servants' polite smiles felt like masks. And Mr. Richardson, when he returned home that evening, looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Was it trust or suspicion? Her mission was simple. Get into his study, find proof. But the study was Richardson's sanctuary. The door was always locked. He kept the key on his person at all times. For days, Catherine watched and waited, learning the rhythms of the house. Richardson worked in his study every evening from 8 until 10. He drank a glass of brandy. He smoked a cigar. At 10 o'clock sharp, he would lock the door and go upstairs to bed. Her chance came on a Thursday. A telegram arrived from San Francisco. A major investor in the mine was coming to town. Richardson was in a flurry, preparing for the visit. He called for a special dinner, ordering the cook to spare no expense. During the chaotic preparations, Catherine saw her opportunity. Richardson had been called away to the mine for an emergency meeting. In his haste, he had left his suit jacket, the one with his keys, slung over a chair in the dining room. Her heart hammered. This was it. She sent the children to the kitchen for cookies, a rare treat that would keep them occupied. With trembling hands, she slipped into the dining room. The keys were heavy in her palm. The largest one, iron and ornate, had to be for the study. She moved down the silent hallway, every creak of the floorboards screaming in her ears. She slid the key into the lock. It turned with a heavy, well-oiled click. The door swung open. The study was dark and smelled of leather, cigar smoke, and money. A huge mahogany desk dominated the room, covered in neat stacks of paper. A large iron safe stood against the far wall. She didn't have much time. She went straight to the desk. Letters, invoices, mining reports. Nothing. It was all legitimate business on the surface. She pulled open the drawers. More of the same. Frustration began to build. Where would he keep his secrets? Then she saw it. Tucked away at the very back of the bottom drawer beneath a stack of old maps was a leather-bound ledger. It was smaller than the others, and the leather was worn smooth. She opened it. The first few pages were just numbers, columns of figures that meant nothing to her. But then she found it. A section at the back. The entries were in a different, more hurried handwriting, and they weren't just numbers. They were names. Jebediah Smith. The name leaped off the page. Next to it was a date, 2 days before he was killed, and a figure, $50. Beneath it, another name, Silas, the man from the livery stable, and another payment, $100 dated the day after the murder. It wasn't just a setup, it was a conspiracy. Richardson had paid Jebediah to cause the scene. Then he'd paid Silas to what? To kill him? As she was trying to process this, she heard a sound in the hallway. Footsteps. Richardson. He was back. Panic seized her. She shoved the ledger back into the drawer, but in her haste, it wouldn't sit flat. The drawer wouldn't close. The footsteps were closer now. At the door. She had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The heavy velvet curtains by the window were her only chance. She dove behind them, pulling the thick fabric around her, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She held her breath, praying the darkness would conceal her. The door opened. Richardson walked in, humming to himself. He strode over to the desk. She could hear the rustle of paper, the clink of a glass as he poured his brandy. Then, silence. A long, drawn-out silence that stretched her nerves to the breaking point. "That's odd," he murmured to himself. She heard the sound of the desk drawer sliding open, the drawer with the ledger. He knew. He knew someone had been there. The silence stretched on, thick and terrifying. She risked a peek through a tiny gap in the curtains. Richardson was standing by the desk, his back to her. He wasn't looking at the drawer. He was looking at the floor. At a small, muddy footprint right next to the desk. A footprint that hadn't been there before. A footprint she had left. He slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping the room. Past the bookshelves, past the fireplace. His eyes moved toward the window, toward the heavy velvet curtains, toward her. He took a step, then another. He knew she was there. The room was so quiet she could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. Richardson walked slowly toward the window, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew someone was hiding. Catherine's mind raced. There was no escape. The door was on the other side of the room. The window behind her was latched, and it was a 20-foot drop to the ground. He reached the curtains. He raised his hand, his thick fingers gripping the edge of the velvet. This was it. She was caught. And then, from downstairs, a child screamed. A piercing, terrified shriek. It was Emma. Richardson froze, his hand hovering inches from the curtain. "What in God's name?" he muttered. Another scream, this time from William, then the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor in the kitchen. Richardson cursed under his breath. He hesitated for a second, his eyes still locked on the curtains. Then he turned and stormed out of the study, leaving the door wide open. "What is going on down there?" he bellowed as he stomped down the hall. Catherine didn't wait. She slipped out from behind the curtain, her legs trembling so badly she could barely stand. She didn't dare take the ledger. Just knowing what was in it was enough for now. She ran from the room, down the hall, and up the back stairs to her own small room, her mind reeling. The screams, the crash. It couldn't have been a coincidence. It was too perfectly timed. Had someone been watching? Had someone created that diversion to save her? She went to her window and looked out into the darkness. At the edge of the property, where the manicured lawn met the wild scrubland, she saw a shadow detach itself from a line of trees, a tall figure moving with a familiar, confident stride. Zack. He had followed her. He had been watching the house. He had seen her go into the study, had seen Richardson return. He had saved her. But how? How had he made the children scream? The answer hit her with a sudden chilling clarity. He hadn't. Someone else had. Someone inside the house. Someone was helping him. She thought back to the past few weeks, the whispers of the staff, the way the housekeeper, a quiet woman named Martha, always seemed to be there when Mrs. Richardson had one of her spells. The way the cook always had a warm cookie for the children, especially when they were upset. Were they part of this? Was the entire household staff working against their master? The next morning, the house was buzzing. A priceless vase had been accidentally knocked over in the kitchen. Emma claimed she'd seen a huge spider. Richardson was furious, but he couldn't prove anything. He sealed his study. He put a new, more complex lock on the door. He watched Catherine like a hawk. But it was too late. He was a king under siege in his own castle, and he didn't even know it. Catherine knew she had to get the information to Zack. She scribbled a hasty note on a scrap of paper. Silas. He paid Silas. But how to deliver it? Help came from an unexpected place. Emma. I have a secret, the little girl whispered to Catherine that afternoon. She held up a small, carved wooden bird. The cowboy man gave it to me. He said it's a messenger bird. Catherine stared at the bird. It was hollow. He told me if you ever needed to send him a secret, I should leave this bird on the big rock by the back gate, Emma said, her eyes wide with the importance of her mission. Zack had an accomplice she never would have suspected, a 5-year-old girl. That evening, as dusk fell, Catherine gave the note to Emma. The little girl, thrilled with her spy game, skipped out the back gate and placed the bird on the rock. An hour later, the bird was gone. The message had been delivered. Now all they could do was wait. Wait for Zack to make his move. And pray that Richardson didn't discover his kingdom was crumbling from within. The waiting was the hardest part. For 2 days, nothing happened. Mr. Richardson was a storm cloud in the house, his temper on a hair trigger. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He watched Catherine, he yelled at the staff, but he was blind to the quiet rebellion happening right under his nose. The tension finally broke on Saturday night. The investor from San Francisco had arrived. Richardson was hosting a lavish dinner party. The whole town was there. The mayor, the bank president, Sheriff Brody. It was a display of power, a king holding court. Catherine was tasked with keeping the children upstairs and out of sight. From the top of the stairs, she could hear the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the forced laughter. Around 9 o'clock, the front door burst open. Zachary Hayes stood in the doorway. He wasn't dressed like a dusty cowboy. He was wearing a clean shirt and his best trousers. But his face was grim, and his hand rested lightly on the Colt revolver strapped to his hip. The party went silent. Every eye in the room turned to him. Mr. Richardson's face went purple with rage. Hayes, what is the meaning of this? This is a private party. I'm here on official business, Zack said, his voice ringing through the silent room. He held up a piece of paper. This is a warrant, signed by Judge Miller in the next county. Sheriff Brody waddled forward, his face red. Now hold on, Hayes, you can't just... This warrant, Zack cut him off, his eyes locking onto Richardson, is for the arrest of Silas Jenkins, for the murder of Jebediah Smith. A collective gasp went through the room. That's preposterous, Richardson boomed. Silas is a good man. You have no proof. Oh, I have proof, Zack said, his voice dangerously calm. He turned his gaze to the livery owner who was trying to shrink into the crowd. "Isn't that right, Silas? You thought you were so clever. Richardson paid you $100 to get rid of the loose end, but you got greedy." Silas started to sweat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "When the sheriff found Jebediah's body, his pockets were empty," Zach continued, his voice like a whip. "Brody here called it a robbery, but I found something he missed. A witness. Someone who saw you, Silas, meeting with Jebediah behind the saloon just an hour before he died. Someone who saw you pay him the $50 Richardson gave you, only you didn't just pay him, you tried to take it back. And when he fought, you killed him." "Lies!" Silas shrieked. "All lies!" "Is it?" Zach said softly. "Then you won't mind telling us where you got the money to pay off your gambling debt at the saloon this morning, the one you've owed for 6 months." He let that sink in. "And you won't mind explaining why we found the murder weapon, a skinning knife with your initials on the handle, buried under a loose floorboard in your stable." Silas's face crumpled. It was over. Sheriff Brody, looking flustered, finally moved. He pulled out his own gun. "All right, Silas, you're coming with me." But Zach wasn't finished. His eyes were still on Richardson. "He didn't act alone," Zach said, his voice dropping, carrying to every corner of the room. "He was following orders." "This is an outrage!" Richardson roared, his voice shaking. "You have no proof I was involved." "Don't I?" Zach took a step into the room. "Your housekeeper, Martha, she's a good woman, and she's got a good memory. She remembers you meeting with Silas the night of the murder, right here in this house. And your cook? She heard you promise Silas a bonus if he handled the problem permanently. The staff, the quiet, invisible people who saw and heard everything, they were his witnesses. Richardson was trapped. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury. His perfect evening, his display of power, was turning into a public execution. "But that's not all," Zach said, delivering the final blow. He held up another document. "This is a sworn statement from your former business partner in Boston, the one you swindled out of his life savings before you came west, the one whose daughter you promised a teaching job to just to lure her out here, penniless and alone." He looked past Richardson, his eyes finding Catherine at the top of the stairs. "Her father's name was Edward Morgan," Zach said. The room erupted in murmurs. It wasn't just a stolen job. It was a vendetta, a cold, calculated act of revenge against a dead man, using his daughter as a pawn. Richardson stared at Catherine, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He saw her not as a servant, but as the ghost of his past, come back to destroy him. "You," he whispered, his voice full of venom. Then he did something no one expected. He lunged, not at Zach, but at his wife. He grabbed the terrified Margaret Richardson, pulling her in front of him like a shield. In his other hand, a small Derringer pistol appeared as if from nowhere. "Nobody move!" he screamed, his eyes wild. "Or the woman gets it!" The party descended into chaos. Women screamed. Men shouted. Zach drew his Colt, his movements fluid and sure. "Let her go, Richardson." "Stay back!" Richardson shrieked, pressing the gun to his wife's head. He began to back away, dragging her toward the study. "It's over! You've ruined me!" Catherine watched in horror from the top of the stairs. This man, so composed and powerful moments before, had become a cornered animal. He backed into the study, pulling his wife with him. He slammed the door shut. The heavy click of the new lock echoed through the hall. He had turned his fortress into a prison, and he had a hostage. The silence that followed the slam of the study door was more terrifying than the screams. Zach stood in the foyer, his gun still raised, his face a grim mask. Sheriff Brody was sweating, looking utterly useless. The party guests were a huddled mass of fear. "He's got my mother!" William Richardson cried from the top of the stairs. Catherine rushed to the children, gathering them into her arms, trying to shield them from the horror unfolding below. "What do we do?" Sheriff Brody stammered. "Get everyone out of the house," Zach commanded, his voice sharp and clear. "Now!" As the guests scrambled for the exit, Zach ran to the study door, pressing his ear against the thick wood. He tried the handle, locked solid. "Richardson!" he yelled. "It's over! Let her go! No one else has to get hurt!" There was no answer. Only a terrifying silence. Catherine came down the stairs, her face pale. "The windows," she said, her voice low. "They have iron bars. He installed them last year. There's no way in or out except that door." Zach slammed his fist against the door in frustration. He's trapped in there with her. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The house was empty now, save for them, the children huddled in the kitchen with the staff and the man in the study. Then they heard a sound from inside, a low, scraping noise. "What is that?" Catherine whispered. Zach's eyes widened in sudden understanding. "The safe!" He backed away from the door. "Everyone get back!" he yelled. "Get out of the house!" Catherine stared at him, confused. "What is it?" "The mine," Zach said, his voice tight with urgency. "Richardson doesn't just store papers in that safe. He keeps blasting powder, dynamite." The realization hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't planning to negotiate. He wasn't planning to surrender. He was planning to take everyone with him. "He's going to blow the whole house up!" Zach shouted. He grabbed an ornate iron poker from the fireplace. "We have to get that door open." He wedged the tip of the poker into the frame and threw his entire weight against it. The wood splintered, but the lock held. Catherine looked around desperately. Her eyes landed on a heavy bronze statue on a pedestal in the hall. "Zach!" she yelled. "Here!" Together they lifted the heavy statue. It took all their strength. "On three," he grunted. "1, 2, 3." They swung the statue like a battering ram. It hit the door with a deafening crash. The wood groaned, cracking down the middle. "Again!" They swung it again. This time the lock burst from the frame and the door flew open, crashing against the inside wall. The scene inside was a nightmare. The study was in shambles. Papers were scattered everywhere. The iron safe stood open and empty. In the center of the room, Richardson had piled the dynamite sticks into a crude mound. He stood over it, a lit cigar in his hand, a mad grin on his face. Margaret Richardson lay on the floor near the desk, her eyes wide with terror. "Too late, Hayes!" Richardson cackled, holding the cigar over the short fuse. "We all go together!" Zach didn't hesitate. He raised his Colt. "Don't!" Catherine screamed, grabbing his arm. "The powder! A spark could set it off." She was right. Firing a gun in here was suicide. Richardson laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "The teacher is smarter than you are, Cowboy. Checkmate." He lowered the cigar. The glowing tip was less than an inch from the fuse. In that split second, Catherine saw something no one else had. A heavy, leather-bound book on the edge of the desk. The ledger. The record of all his crimes. She didn't think. She acted. She lunged forward, grabbing the heavy book. With all her might, she threw it. It flew across the room, end over end, and struck Richardson square in the face. His head snapped back with the impact. The cigar flew from his hand, sailing through the air in a fiery arc. Time seemed to slow down. The glowing cigar landed on the priceless Persian rug, inches from the pile of dynamite. It smoldered for a second. Then a tiny wisp of smoke curled up from the thick wool. The rug was catching fire. A small flame flickered to life. It began to lick its way across the rug, a slow, inexorable serpent of fire, crawling toward the dynamite. They had seconds. Zach moved first. He leaped over the scattered furniture, grabbing the stunned and bleeding Richardson and throwing him against the wall, knocking him unconscious. "Catherine, get his wife!" he yelled. Catherine scrambled to Margaret Richardson's side, helping the sobbing woman to her feet and dragging her toward the door. The flame on the rug was growing, moving faster now, feeding on the dry wool. It was only a few feet from the pile of death. Zach was right behind them, but he stopped in the doorway. He looked back at the fire. at the dynamite. "Zach, come on!" Catherine screamed. He didn't move. He was looking at the desk, at the scattered papers, the proof of Richardson's crimes, his whole life's work. Without it, Richardson might walk free. "The papers!" he yelled, starting back into the room. "No!" she shrieked. "It's not worth it! Leave it!" The flame was a foot away, 6 inches. He hesitated, torn between justice and survival. It was the longest second of Catherine's life. Then he turned and ran, grabbing her hand, pulling her out of the room and down the hall. "Everyone out!" he roared. They burst out the front door, dragging Mrs. Richardson between them just as a deafening explosion ripped the house apart. A wave of heat and force threw them to the ground. The night sky lit up as bright as day. Debris rained down around them as the Richardson mansion, the symbol of power in Silver Creek, became a raging inferno. Catherine lay on the ground, the sound of the explosion ringing in her ears, her body shaking. She looked at Zach, his face black with soot. He was alive. They were all alive. The proof was gone. The ledger, the letters, all turned to ash. But Richardson was finished. His kingdom had burned to the ground. As she watched the flames devour the house, Catherine knew her old life, the quiet life of a Boston teacher, was gone forever. It had burned away in the fire, leaving something new, something harder and stronger in its place. The dust settled. The fire burned itself out, leaving the blackened skeleton of a house on the hill, a monument to a fallen king. Richardson was pulled from the rubble, alive but broken. His reign was over. With his wife and half the town testifying against him, he was sent to prison, a mad, raving man who had lost everything. Silver Creek began to heal. The story became a legend, told and retold in the saloon. The story of the quiet schoolteacher and the mysterious cowboy who brought down the town tyrant. Catherine didn't stay to hear it. She left with Zach the day after the fire. They rode north, away from the whispers and the stares, toward the Double H Ranch. As they crested the last hill and saw the ranch spread out in the valley below, a collection of sturdy buildings nestled by a creek, Catherine felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt since before her parents died. "It's not much," Zach said, his voice quiet. "It's a home," she replied. Life on the ranch was hard, honest work. Catherine started a school for the ranch children in a converted bunkhouse. She taught them to read and write, but she also taught them about courage and about standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Zach, or Caleb as he now called himself, reclaiming his own name, worked the land. The shadow of his past, the ghost of his brother, never fully left him. But out here, under the wide-open sky, it seemed to weigh less heavily on his shoulders. They worked side by side, two broken people healing each other. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their fears, their dreams. They fell in love slowly, quietly, like the turning of the seasons. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was something real, forged in fire and fear, built on a foundation of shared survival. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, he turned to her. "My brother's name was Elias," he said, the first time he'd spoken the name aloud to her since that night by the creek. "He loved books. He always wanted to be a teacher." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was old, and the clasp was broken. "This was his," Caleb said, placing it in her hand. "He'd want you to have it." Catherine opened the locket. Inside, there wasn't a portrait. There was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. She carefully unfolded it. It was a poem, written in a young man's elegant script. A poem about finding hope in the darkness. Tears welled in her eyes. It was a gift from a ghost, a connection to the past that had shaped the man she loved. "There's something else," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. He took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. Catherine Morgan, I am a deserter and a coward. My name is not my own, and my past is full of ghosts, but if you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your husband." She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Caleb Thorne." They were married by a traveling preacher a month later, with the ranch hands and their children as witnesses. Catherine Morgan, the starving teacher from Boston, had found her home. Caleb Thorne, the haunted soldier, had found his peace. Their life wasn't easy. The West was still a hard, unforgiving place. They faced droughts and blizzards and the constant struggle to build something that would last. But they faced it together. Years passed. They had 2 children, a boy named Elias and a girl they called Hope. The Double H Ranch prospered. The small schoolhouse grew. One day, a letter arrived, bearing a postmark from Boston. It was an offer for Catherine to return and take a position as headmistress at a prestigious girls' school. It was the life she once thought she wanted. She showed the letter to Caleb. He read it, his face unreadable. "You could go," he said. "You deserve a life of comfort, of society." She looked at him, at this man who had saved her, who had lied to her, who had fought beside her. She looked out at the rolling hills, at the children playing by the creek, at the life they had built from ashes. She took the letter and tore it in half. "I am home," she said. She knew then that her journey had never been about finding a teaching position. It had been about finding herself. The girl who had collapsed in the street was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own strength, a woman who had faced down monsters and won. The greatest twist of her life wasn't the lies or the conspiracies. It was that in losing everything, she had found everything that truly mattered. It all came down to a loaf of bread, offered in kindness by a man with a hidden past. A simple act that set in motion a chain of events that burned down one life and built another. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how a single moment, a single choice, can change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of the strange and the mysterious.